2020 is so close to being over. After today, there's only 2 days left of this year since today's December 29th, 2020. And then after those 2 days, the new year is here. 2021 is here. And I've got to say that so much has happened this year. It honestly feels like such a long year. Like, I honestly can't believe that January and February was in this year. If you know what I'm saying, like, the events that took place in January and February, they don't feel like they took place in this year. They don't feel like they took place in 2020. And if I'm being honest, this year feels like five separate years wrapped into one. That's how long 2020 has felt. That's how hectic the year has been. That's how much stuff has happened in this year. So much to the point where it feels like the start of the year was 5 years ago, and January and February were like 4 years ago, essentially. And because of how hectic this year has been, I decided that I would make a video series summarizing all the events that took place in this year. But like I said, so much happened this year, it was too much to put all into one video. So I decided to split it up into five separate sections. I decided to split 2020 up into five separate sections. Because like I said, this year felt like 5 years wrapped into one. So I made each section of the year its own video, and I've made three of these videos already, and this is the fourth one. The first video talks about events taking place from January 1 to March 10th. The second video, March 11th through May 24th. Yesterday's video, which was the third one, was May 25th through August 16th. And then in today's video, we'll be talking about August 17th through November 2nd. Now, if you're wondering why I chose those two dates for the cutoffs for the fourth section of the year, the reason why I chose August 17th as the beginning date for the section of the year is for two reasons. Three reasons, actually. First reason was because of the fact that that is when COVID 19 started to get a lot better in the United States. That's when the US started to recover from the second major spike of this virus. Third reason, though, the biggest reason, the most important reason by far why I chose that date was because that was the first day of the Democratic National Convention. Before I begin summarizing the events that took place in this section of the year, I would first like to point out that this part of the year was very eventful. A lot of stuff happened from August 17th through November 2nd. And the second thing I would like to point out is that's actually when I started doing my daily upload schedule on this channel. I actually made this channel on August 7th or August 8th, but my first video on this channel I actually recorded in like July, but I hadn't made the channel yet, so I couldn't upload it. But I started my daily upload schedule on September 3rd, I believe, and that falls into this section of the year. So a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about in this video, I already made videos about it in the past few months when the events were actually happening at the time. So you can watch those videos if you're interested on my views on certain topics. But this section of the year began on August 17th, 2020, and that is because of the fact that that's when the Democratic National Convention started. The Democratic National Convention is what officially made Joe Biden the nominee for the Democratic Party in the 2020 presidential election. And this lasted 4 days from August 17th through August 20th. And because of the pandemic, they couldn't do it in person for the most part, so they had to do an alternative format. It was pretty different from any other convention they've done in the past. But just a few days before this convention, this was technically in the last section of the year, but I didn't mention it in yesterday's video. I thought it would fit better in today's video. A few days before the convention on August 11th, 2020, that is when Joe Biden officially announced that Kamala Harris would be his running mate for the presidential election, that Kamala Harris would be his vice president. And I would like to point out the day before he made that announcement, I actually made a video on this channel. It was one of my first videos. On August 10th, 2020, I made a video on this channel where I talked about my predictions for who Joe Biden would choose. And I've got to say, I guessed correctly. I'm pretty proud of the fact that I was able to guess Joe Biden's pick. I guessed that he would pick Kamala Harris, and you can watch that video, check it out. But it was not that hard to guess. A lot of people thought it would be Kamala Harris, and it was her. So, but even then, I'm still proud of myself for guessing that. So, Democratic National Convention was that week of August, but the week after that, from August 24th through August 27th, 2020, in that 4 day period, that was the Republican National Convention. Now, this was also different from every other convention for the Republican Party that has been done in the past, but it was also different from the Democratic Party. It's kind of hard to explain all the details. I don't have enough time for that, but you can watch replays of each convention on YouTube and see for yourself how they were different. But essentially, the idea was to reaffirm the fact that Trump would be the nominee for the Republican Party in this presidential election. That was the entire purpose of the Republican National Convention. So that is the reason why I decided to make August 17th the cutoff, because that's when these conventions started. And the reason why these conventions are such a big deal is because they are essentially what kicks off the presidential campaign cycle in every election. Because before August 17th, yeah, Joe Biden was the de facto nominee and Donald Trump was the de facto nominee of the Republicans, but they didn't really campaign nearly as much. A lot of people weren't really thinking about the election nearly as much from like March through August, but after the conventions, people started thinking about the elections a lot more. That was a lot. People focused on it a lot more. Joe Biden, Donald Trump actually actively campaigned a lot more in the last 3 months, 2 to 3 months leading up to the election. The election was on November 3rd, by the way, and that is why I'm ending this section off at November 2nd. So the conventions were in late August, but that's not the only thing that happened in late August. The last 2 weeks of August were pretty eventful. So another thing that happened on August 23rd, 2020 was that Jacob Blake was shot 7 times by a cop in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I don't remember the exact reason why the cop shot him, but because of that fact, because of the fact that he got shot 7 times by that cop, there were a lot of protests in that city that were protesting the police brutality that the cop who shot Jacob Blake had performed and how he was abusing his power. So this was essentially a continuation of the protests that were already taking place in the summer that originally happened because of George Floyd's killing. So this was taking place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, because that's where Jacob Blake was shot. But 2 days later, in that very city where the protests were taking place, the 17-year-old named Kyle Rittenhouse, who lived in Illinois, the neighboring state, he apparently had gone to the Kenosha protests, and he apparently had a gun with him, and when two or three of the protesters were chasing him, he apparently shot them. And this was such a heated debate on whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse was justified in shooting the protesters, but he ended up killing those protesters, and that's why that incident was so controversial. This all took place in Kenosha, the very same city that Jacob Blake was originally shot in, so that was a very divisive issue for the rest of August. And then in late August, there was also hurricanes taking place. The most notable one was Hurricane Laura, which affected southeast Texas and Louisiana pretty badly. And that really screwed over a lot of people. So that happened in the last few days of August. And then one other unfortunate event that happened in late August, August 28th, 2020 to be exact, was Chadwick Boseman unfortunately passed away on that date. If you don't know who he was, he is most well known for being the main actor in Black Panther, a 2018 Marvel movie. He was the main actor of that movie. He's also been an actor in some other movies, but that was a very unfortunate event. We lost Chadwick Boseman and Kobe Bryant in the same year, and that made an already bad year even worse, the fact that he passed away. So a lot of people were very sad about that, and it's easy to see why. He was an inspiration to many people, so it's easy to see why people were sad about that, or even mad about that. In 2020, we have seen the deaths of many famous people, unfortunately, and we're going to get to another death soon in this video, unfortunately. But before we get to that, we're now moving into September of this year. We just talked about all the main events that happened in the second half of August, but now we're going to talk about September. One thing that happened in the fall of 2020, but especially in September of 2020, was that the game Among Us got very popular. Now, this game was made like all the way back in 2018, but it just got popular this fall. In August and September, that's when it skyrocketed in popularity. And this is a multiplayer game you can play either on your phone or your PC. And it gained so much popularity, there were so many memes surrounding the game. And at one point near the end of October, just a couple weeks before the election took place, a bunch of Twitch streamers organized an Among Us game with Congresswomen Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and Ilhan Omar. These are two relatively young Democratic members of the House, and it was very interesting seeing them play this game with a bunch of Twitch streamers on a Twitch live stream. And at one point, the Twitch live stream on AOC's channel got almost 500,000 viewers concurrently. So at one point, there were 500,000 people watching that live stream at the same time. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. So that's one thing that happened in the fall. Another thing that happened in early September was there was this one gender reveal party that went horribly wrong because it ended up causing a massive fire in California, and this caused so much damage all because of a gender reveal party. But that wasn't the only fire that happened this fall in California. California, unfortunately, suffered from many fires this fall. That usually happens every year, but this year apparently was especially bad, so that was another unfortunate event. Speaking of unfortunate events, on September 18th, 2020, a little over 3 months ago, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg unfortunately passed away at the age of 87. So, this was a very tragic event for obvious reasons, but what this also did was it created a vacancy in the Supreme Court just a month and a half before a presidential election. Now, you guys might remember 4 years ago in 2016, Antonin Scalia died around 9 months before the 2016 presidential election, but the Republicans were able to stop President Obama from nominating a new Supreme Court justice for all those months, and then that seat eventually got filled by Neil Gorsuch in 2017, who was a Trump appointee. But unlike in 2016, President Trump was able to get his nominee appointed to the Supreme Court in just around a month, because around a month after Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death on October 26th, 2020, Amy Coney Barrett was actually confirmed to the Supreme Court by the Senate. She was nominated by Trump and then confirmed to the Supreme Court by the Republican controlled Senate. And that's the thing. The Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and the president's also Republican, and that's why they were able to get ACB through very quickly. But in 2016, the president was a Democrat, but the Senate was owned by Republicans, so that's why you see that massive difference between now and 4 years ago. But also, a lot of people saw that as hypocritical. The fact that in 2016, all these Republican senators, they thought that President Obama shouldn't nominate someone new to the Supreme Court, but in 2020, they were fine with Trump doing that. So a lot of people thought that was hypocritical, but a lot of other people thought that was perfectly fine, because in 2016, the presidency and the Senate were controlled by different parties, but in 2020, they were controlled by the same party. So you decide for yourself whether or not they're justified, that the Republicans were justified in not delaying the nomination and confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. I talked about this at the time as the whole debate was going on about the Supreme Court, but that added a whole new layer of complexity to this election cycle, at least at the time. But in the end, Amy Coney Barrett got confirmed to the Supreme Court before the election actually took place. So it really didn't matter whether or not Joe Biden won the election, because Amy Coney Barrett was on the Supreme Court anyway before Joe Biden even got elected. By far, the most important thing that happened in this time period was the build up to the presidential election, the build up to the 2020 presidential election. Now, there were supposed to be three debates in total, three presidential debates and one vice presidential debate leading up to the presidential election, but the vice presidential debate happened on October 7th, 2020, and that took place between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. And one of the biggest things that people remember from that debate is the fly that was on Mike Pence's face for a good amount of time. But for the presidential debates, there were supposed to be three of them originally, but there ended up only being two, and here's why. Trump got COVID in the first couple of days of October. On October 1 or October 2, depending on which time zone you were in, it was announced on Twitter that Trump had contracted COVID 19. And because of that, Biden was afraid to do the second debate with him on October 15th, because October 15th would have technically been in the 2 week time frame that Trump was supposed to quarantine for, but I think he was already recovered from the virus by then, so it didn't even matter that much. But Biden was afraid to do a debate with Trump on October 15th, so what happened was the debate got cancelled, but they each did their own separate town halls at the same time, but on different channels. I made a video talking about this when that happened, so you can watch that, but I thought that was pretty annoying, having to flip back and forth between the two channels. Just a couple days before that Trump COVID announcement, there was the first presidential debate on September 29th. Since Biden was kind of close to Trump, a lot of people were hypothesizing that Biden might have gotten COVID, but the test came out negative for Biden, so he never got it. Then the second and final presidential debate happened on October 22nd, just 2 weeks before the election. Leading up to this election, one thing that was talked about a lot was mail-in ballots, because there was a pandemic going on still, and for a lot of people it was unsafe to vote in person, especially if they had like some pre-existing health condition or they were old in age, because for those people this virus is pretty deadly. During this time period in the early fall and late summer of 2020, COVID 19 was spreading a lot less than it was in the summer and spring of this year in the United States, but that started to change in the second half of October. The daily case count started to increase a lot. That's also the reason why I'm ending this time period at November 2nd.